Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Energy Star version 3, Vision 8 changes we're going to talk about today. We're going to begin with a little bit of a program overview, talking about where the program stands and why revisions take place. To begin that process, we're going to take a little historical view of what's happening with the program. As you can see with this slide, in 2012 was the first was really still the transition year for Energy Star, going from version 2 to version 3, and they had about 100,000 houses go through the program. In 2013 and 2014, those numbers have gone down a little bit, partially because of the downturn in the economy, but also largely because of version 3 coming to the market. So the change between version 2 and version 3 did see some builders take or go away from the program. The market realities show that as well on a national scale. The percentage of Energy Star houses built nationally, you can see, hit a high in 2011 during version 2, and as version 3 came on the scene, participation went down. Locally here in Colorado, we saw that same trend. However, in 2014, we were seeing an uptick in houses and builders taking part in the program. And you'll see that there's a lot of anticipation for what's going to happen in the years coming forward. We do believe that there'll be greater participation in Energy Star, and to a large degree, we see that over the course of last year, we had over 800 new partners join the Energy Star program across the country, and you can see in Colorado specifically that a lot of those people were in Colorado. So there's a lot of interest in the program as energy codes get a little bit more stringent. The alignment between Energy Star and energy codes and people's willingness to participate in the program, we think, is going to continue to grow. A lot of people have been asking questions about version 3.1 and what does version 3.1 mean. So we're going to spend just a few seconds here explaining version 3.1. The big thing about version 3.1 is that it's only going to take place in states that have adopted a statewide code. It's based off of the minimum efficiencies of the IECC, which is what the Energy Star program bases itself on. Currently, it's based off of the 2009 IECC mandatory insulation levels. What version 3.1 does is move that minimum insulation level to the 2012 or 2015 IECC insulation levels, depending on what the state has adopted. All the checklists, all the other mandatory parts of the program remain the same. The only thing that changes in version 3.1 are the minimum insulation levels. So what that means is that there are a few states that have moved or are in the process of moving to version 3.1 based on the fact that they have a statewide code. So again, it's only in place for those states or the District of Columbia that do have a statewide code. For Colorado, it's very unlikely that we will see version 3.1 in Colorado, largely because we're a home rule state and we don't have a statewide code, and it's very unlikely that we will move to a statewide code. The only way that the only real possibility for it to happen would be if the majority of jurisdictions around the state were to adopt a code that's different than the 2009. Potentially, I don't think it's very likely, but potentially they could say just along the Front Range of Colorado that we would move to version 3.1 because the majority of the jurisdictions have gone to the 2012 or 2015 IECC. But because there's not consistency across the state, again, it's really unlikely that version 3.1 will take place. The other thing to know about version 3.1, where it is going into place, revision 8 will apply to that state as well, because remember, the only thing that's really different is the mandatory insulation levels have gone from the 2009 IECC version to a higher code, depending on what the state's gone to. So let's begin to talk about revisions and why revisions are happening. We're on revision 8 of the program. Revisions are based on partner feedback. They're also designed to make the program easier to comply with, and there are a few guiding principles that specifically for this revision Energy Star was trying to utilize when thinking about how to change the program. First, they wanted to keep but ultimately streamline the requirements that provide the most value for the builders and partners in the program. They wanted to eliminate requirements that create the most hassle and provide the least value. And in this case, I think you'll see that most of that is revolving around the paperwork shuffle that happens with regards to implementing the program. The next thing that they want to do is better align the process for Energy Star with the HERS rating system to ensure that the program would be able to be implemented more successfully across the country. And that's a big thing to remember, is that this is a national program, and being a national program, they wanted to ensure that these things were able to take effect across the country. So some of the revisions, although might not be, you might not think made a lot of sense, they had to take in the perspective of a national program and what the majority of the users of the program would benefit from in a revision change. The checklists have been structured slightly different in revision 8. The first checklist is actually a report. It's called the HVAC design report that needs to be completed, one report for each unique system that's being designed there. The raters checklist include an HVAC design review, which is reviewing the design report. There's the thermal enclosure systems checklist. That's pretty much the same as it was in the past. There's an HVAC systems final field install checklist as well, and we'll go over all of these. Next, there's an HVAC commissioning checklist. This is a checklist that the commissioning contractor must use, and that contractor continues to need to be credentialed by an HVAC oversight organization to complete the checklist. And we'll see that there's a little bit more need now to ensure that the HVAC contractor that's commissioning the system is actually credentialed, and there's a process for the rater to document that. Next would be the builder's water management requirements. You'll see that I changed that from checklist to requirements because this is no longer a checklist. It becomes a mandatory requirement for the builder to do. And they have to figure out how to implement those water management strategies into their day-to-day field operations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Okay, revision 8. The idea of revision 8 is that it reduces paperwork. So the objective of a revision 8 is to reduce paperwork management. So the rater is not required to collect the water management systems builder checklist. But remember, that checklist is still required. It's become more of a requirement than a true checklist. The checklist is a guide to give the builder the features that they need to add into their systems and processes while building the house. We no longer need to collect the full load calculations, an AHRI certificate for matching AC systems, a separate ventilation design document, and a test or balance report for each system. The HVAC systems commissioning checklist, we don't need to collect by default, which means that we're not required to collect it. But as you'll see going through this webinar today, EnergyLogic will be asking to collect these documents and be a centralized storage source for all of these documents in case there are any issues coming up. But we're not required to collect them. We'd like to collect them. Raters must collect the HVAC design report, which we'll go over in a few minutes here. That report is a per system design, which becomes important to understand that every unique system needs an HVAC design report. Again, EnergyLogic would like to continue to collect these documents as a service for centralized documentation tracking to ensure that everybody knows if they ever have to go back and revisit a house where they can get those documents, and ultimately from a quality assurance perspective for us through ResNet, it's important for us to have that documentation, and then ultimately for you, your HQITO or your oversight organization, quality assurance of HVAC contractors, it might be important to have that documentation as well. The idea again of Revision 8 is to greatly improve workflow. So Rusty, why don't you talk a little bit about these reports and who's responsible for each of the reports?
So one of the biggest changes is going to be this new HVAC design report. In the past, you've had to submit a design report for every individual address that's going to be certified. But with this new one, if you are doing the same model over and over and over again, you can submit one design report that can apply to numerous addresses as long as it falls within certain parameters. The other new one is the HVAC commissioning checklist, which will be filled out by the HVAC contractor and maintained by the HVAC contractor. In the past, the rating company had to verify a number of points that the HVAC contractor was doing. With this new checklist, the burden falls more on the HVAC contractor to do their commissioning, make sure that everything is being done correctly, and it's not going to be verified by the rater under the program. Again, EnergyLogic does want to collect this just as a convenience more for the HVAC contractor in a place that they know that they have it. The rater design review checklist is what the rating company is going to review on what the design report has listed. So this is where the rater will go in and verify things like the square footage of the house matches the square footage of the design, square footage of the windows matches the square footage of the design. So we will be double checking that the design report is consistent with the actual house being certified, but we will be verifying a lot less items than what was done under Revision 7. Our rating field checklist, the format of it has changed, but most of the points are the same. They've just been moved around. So this is what, when we go out into the field, when the rater goes out into the field, this will be the checklist that we have to complete. And it's basically 2 pages, and the first page will be the typical insulation, general thermal enclosure requirements. And even though they've moved around in location on the checklist, we're basically, from a practical point, we'll be verifying the exact same things that we did under Revision 7. And then the second page is where we get into the mechanical equipment and HVAC contractor, and basically we'll just be in that section for the rater. We're verifying that the furnace, the air conditioner, the ventilation meet the ENERGY STAR requirements, and that what was put in the design was actually installed in the house. And then again, the old water management checklist has gone away. Now it is just a requirement sheet. It'll be the builder's responsibility to make sure that they're constructing the home that meets all the requirements. The rater will not be verifying those things in the field unless we do it under a different arrangement. But under the ENERGY STAR Revision 8, all the water management system requirements will be the builder's responsibility to verify that they're meeting them.
So let's jump in a little bit with regard to the HVAC design report and talk about what does a per system design mean. The HVAC design report talks about doing a design per unique system. So when it says this, it means that models that have variations between them will need a new HVAC design report. The first condition is with regards to conditioned floor area. It says that conditioned floor area used in loads on the HVAC design report is between 0 and 300 square feet of the certified home. So if a home is a home that is actually being certified is larger than 300 square feet of what's been put on the HVAC design report, or smaller than what the actual number being put on the HVAC design report, then a new design would need to be created for that house. So for example, if on the design report you designed for a house that was 1,000 square feet, if it was 900 square feet when we actually got out there to the house, or if it was 1,400 square feet when we actually got to the house, you would need to do a new design report on that house.
Yeah, basically a lot of the design report, just to kind of simplify it, what they were thinking is, if you're doing one model over and over and over again and it's the same, you only have to submit the one report. Whereas in the past you've had to submit it for every single individual address. But a lot of the builders out there, they will have a model, call it the alpha model, and they'll build it with a bedroom over the garage, or with an extra bedroom downstairs, or things like that. And even though they call it the same model, if it doesn't fall within these parameters, it's going to necessitate that they create a new design report.
In the same way they look at windows, window area used in loads on the HVAC design report are between 0 and 60 square feet of the windows of the certified house. So we have this issue sometimes come up where we go out and measure the windows at a final stage of construction to verify what the window square footage is on the certified house, and it doesn't match what was on the design report. So this, in essence, gives you a leeway of 60 square feet of window area greater than what's on the design report. But if it's more than 60 square feet, or if it's significantly less than what is on the design report, again, a new design would be needed to be created for that particular house that's being certified. Number of occupants used in the loads on the HVAC design report is within plus or minus 2 occupants of the certified house. This gives us a lot more leeway than in revision 7 for documenting the number of occupants, which is based off of the number of rooms in the house, bedrooms in the house, plus 1. So we need to remember that the bedrooms can include spaces like studies or offices that have closets, and adequate egress out of that room would be included as a bedroom from the perspective of Energy Star. So again, this plus or minus 2 occupants gives us a lot of leeway. I don't think we'll see many issues with this, as it actually should help us a lot with final certification of the house. The variations in the total heat gain on the HVAC design report across all orientations is less than or equal to 6 kBTUs. So in essence, we need to do each variation of the house per orientation and ensure that it's within 0 to 6 kBTUs of each other. And then if any of the above conditions are not met, the HVAC designer is required to provide a new unique Energy Star version 3 HVAC design report for that particular plan. So this may seem a little confusing right now, but we'll go over it again here at least once and try to explain it again to help you understand. The oversight role of the raters. So raters are no longer required to collect the documents from installing contractors by default. So remember, we're not required to collect these documents, but EnergyLogic would like to collect them. We're just going to make sure that if we don't get them, it's not going to hold up certification of the house. We'd like to generally be a centralized housing facility for all of these reports for our own internal quality assurance, and ultimately for your quality assurance when you're dealing with your oversight organizations as an HVAC contractor. We're not required to collect the refrigerant charge documentations, collect the test and balancing reports, verify zone limits for intermittent bath fans, because ultimately they're no longer required as part of the program, although they're highly recommended for houses that get the Energy Star certification. Raters will continue to do the following HVAC-related tasks. We will check equipment model numbers to ensure that the model numbers that are on the design report are equivalent to the models that are actually installed in the home. We'll measure the static pressure of the home. However, we'll not be comparing the static pressure measurement to the static pressure measurement that you as an HVAC contractor are actually measuring. Verify duct installation, insulation, duct leakage, and room pressure balancing will continue by the rating organization, and we will measure the airflow of local exhaust and whole house ventilation systems. We will inspect the vent inlets and vent systems controls to make sure that air that's being brought into the home is as clean as possible and not bringing dirty or polluted air back into the home. We'll check the sound limits for continuous and whole house ventilation. Again, if you're using a Whisper Green fan, for example, or a Broan fan for your whole house controlled mechanical ventilation, the sound limits, the zone ratings still are a requirement of the program. So now that we have a general review of Revision 8, what's required, what's not required, and the checklist structure, let's talk about the details a little bit. And we always need to remember that there are numerous footnotes that go along with the program, and it's really important to take some time to read all those footnotes. That brings up something that I just remembered. There are some handouts that we connected to the webinar. The handouts are the checklists and also an HVAC grouping document that we'll go over in a few minutes here. You can open up the handout section on your webinar and you can actually download them right now if you'd like to. And we'll give you website information to get them after the webinar as well. The HVAC design report is also broken up into a number of sections. We have Section 1, which is the design overview. Section 2, ventilation design. Section 3 is room by room heat load and cooling loads. Section 4 is heating and cooling equipment selection. And Section 5 is the duct design. The main thing to remember with regards to when you're doing your duct design is that the thermal enclosure checklist that the rater is looking at in the house is assuring us that we have a defined thermal envelope where air barriers and the thermal barrier is in alignment throughout the whole house. Therefore, we need to make sure that the HVAC contractor is utilizing the grade 1 insulation that has been specified for that particular house using the actual R values and U values and solar heat gain coefficients that are specified for that particular house. Also, the house will be tight and verified, so using the tight selection for your HVAC design is really important. And ultimately, the rater is ensuring that the HVAC contractor has something that they didn't have before in the past, before Energy Star's version 3. We're ensuring that you have an envelope that controls airflow, moisture flow, and thermal flow. So you need to use the correct characteristics in that home to get the properly sized equipment as required by Energy Star. And because of that, the HVAC contractor is really required to use the exact and actual R values, U values, and solar heat gain coefficients that are installed in the home while they're doing their HVAC design. Also, there's assurance that the house is going to be tight and that we get control of airflow, moisture flow, and thermal flow in that house. So the HVAC contractor should be using the tight settings in their HVAC design software to ensure, again, that they're getting properly designed and system for that particular home. So the first section of the HVAC design report is talking about the differences between single designs and grouping. So it says that you need to complete one HVAC design report for each system designed for that house plan. And for a plan that is intended to be built with potentially different configurations, you might need to do groupings on this. So this gives us the idea of the single system design versus a group design. And down here in the first section, you need to identify whether you're doing a site-specific design, which would be that single design, or a group design. And if you're doing a group design, how many have you done for that particular model? So Plan A might have, 8 different designs that are doing it for 8 different orientations or 8 different configurations of that particular house. Footnote 2 helps explain this in a little bit more detail. Footnote 2 says the report shall represent a single system design for each house plan. The system designed as documented on the HVAC design report must fall within the following tolerances for the home to be certified. So these tolerances, 3.3 through 4.6 in this footnote, are in essence the things that the rater will be verifying on the HVAC design report with regards to the actual built house. So again, in essence, there's this notion that the rater will be looking at things that are specific to the house that's being certified based and comparing what's actually in the home to what's on the HVAC design report. This might lead some designers to say that it makes a lot more sense to do a specific site-specific design on the house, but that isn't required, but I would say that it's recommended and would ensure less issues as we move forward looking at the houses actually in the field. But if you do enough groupings, you probably would get yourself to a point where you're going to be within these tolerances for the houses. The next thing it says that as long as a report has been provided that falls within these tolerances for the home to be certified, no additional work is required. However, if no report falls within these tolerances, or if any aspect of the system design changes, then an additional report will need to be generated prior to certification. So grouping allows you to design for a group of configurations that are within these tolerances. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you create a group. Again, these tolerance items are what the rater will be verifying on the final confirmed home.
I have a question for you. If the city design criteria differs from ENERGY STAR criteria, which do we abide by?
So primarily the city design criteria will vary from a design temperature perspective, and you would use the cities or the jurisdictions that you're designing in. Always code or what the city says would trump what ENERGY STAR says. That being said, though, if you're changing the design temperatures, there's a new place on the checklist where you would, I believe, check that off and make that notable to the rater that's looking at on the design report. And also, it doesn't take you out of the requirements for either doing a site-specific design or a grouping process for the plans that you're working with. On the ENERGY STAR website, there is a grouping assistance tool. This is a spreadsheet that you can use to help figure out how many groups you need to do for a particular model. We also have a document that EnergyLogic has created off of some ENERGY STAR documentation that we can provide you. So there are basically 2 documents that can help you when you're starting to work your way through this grouping protocol. And both of those we can get to you, so just let us know if you'd like them and we can send them out to you. Basically, the grouping process is broken into five steps. Rusty's going to walk us through these steps.
So the first thing that, the most important thing for the grouping is the conditioned floor area and window area of the base plan and all the options and elevations. If you're within the parameters we've talked about earlier, the 300 square feet of floor area or the 60 square feet of window area, you can submit one duct design for numerous houses. But if you're outside of that, then you'll have to submit specific designs for those houses to be certified. On the duct design worksheet, you'll notice that there is all 8 orientations that you can fill out. So if the house is being built, the same house is being built with one is south and the other is north, you can still do this on one duct design sheet. So again, if you are using grouping and your configurations fall within the parameters, you can just name that group and submit it to the rater, and they will be able to use that checklist for more than one house. So ultimately, the decision between using grouping and going with site-specific is going to fall to the HVAC designer. And as long as they understand the various parameters, they will be the one that decides which is easier for them. I think at first it sounds like it can be kind of confusing to use grouping, but it was put in there to allow for less paperwork and a little bit easier flow and not keep duplicating the same work over and over and over again. And one of the maybe a little more subtle things that would require you to do more site-specific duct design is if you are trying to group, but you have, for example, a house with a lot of windows on one side, you may get the orientation. If one's facing south and one's facing north, you may end up exceeding this 6 kBTUs per orientation, and that would require you to use more than one duct design. You would not be able to group those.
Yeah, and just remember, it's the full design. It's the manual JDS, the whole thing, not just the duct design. Grouping questions. If the HVAC contractor is using grouping for their design strategy, how should they document which group applies to which specific address to home? So in essence, this is a question we're going to put up as a poll thing, as a poll question. Diane's going to take over the screen real quick and see, now that you have a little bit of an understanding of what this grouping process is about, the idea between either doing a site-specific design or going through this grouping process, what do you think you're going to do? Okay, so why don't we close the poll? Okay, so it's really pretty evenly split between all these choices here. Great. So I really believe that you're going to need to spend a little bit of time really understanding the grouping process. Make sure if you're an HVAC contractor on the call today that you get the grouping worksheet and also the Word document that explains grouping from us, and we can help you decide what process makes most sense for you to do.
Someone did ask if we could send the Excel grouping spreadsheet along with a copy of the webinar.
Yes, we can send.
Absolutely.
We can just do that and send all the documents with the webinar.
I think one of the most important things for the people that are going to use grouping is just to make sure that you communicate closely with your rating company and let them know how you're grouping, which addresses apply, but it'll be the communication between the HVAC contractor, the builder, and the rating company will be really important.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, Rusty, because again, the house that we're physically verifying at final is what's being compared to your design report. So we need to make sure that the design report is accurate to that particular house. That's, as you obviously know, that's what causes any problems at final. That's what's causing the problems right now. And this effort in the revision 8 is to try to eliminate those problems that are happening now in the field. Okay, let's go to section 2 of the design report. Section 2 is all about whole house controlled mechanical ventilation. The first section is all about the airflow and getting the design correctly, ensuring that the design is taken into account in the HVAC design of the house. You're now allowed to use ASHRAE 62.2 in the 2010 version or the 2013 version. I can tell you that we would prefer if we stay on the 2010 version right now. If you decide to use the 2013 version, just make sure that we're notified. System types and controls, you're still allowed to use either supply, exhaust, or balanced ventilation strategies. Again, exhaust ventilation strategies seem to be the systems of choice in our market. We're seeing some move a little bit to more combination strategy, utilizing a little bit of exhaust and a little bit of supply ventilation strategies. And if you'd like to talk about some different strategies that are coming out, we're more than willing to talk about those. The thing to remember with regards to controls is that they're looking for specific controls that allow the system to operate automatically without occupant intervention, but also systems that have accessible overrides. So I think Rusty had the best explanation of this that I've seen.
Yeah, I think we run into confusion into the field. The short answer is to allow the system to operate automatically without occupant intervention means that they don't have a switch on the wall, that they don't know what it is, and they flip it up and down to see what happens to turn the fan off. If you're using a wall switch for your whole house ventilation, it needs to be labeled so that the occupant knows what it is. The specified controls, those are the controls that are in the actual fan housing. Using the example of the Panasonic Whisper Green, you take off the cover and you'll see the controls that have flow and time, and that would meet the requirement that allows an occupant, if they want to turn the system off, they can do it there.
Also, if you're using any system that is connecting a duct to the outside to ventilate, to help bring fresh air into the home, that duct will need a motorized damper. The next section is about sound. The fan of the specified system is rated at less than or equal to 3 sones if intermittent and less than or equal to 1 zone if continuous. Fans exempted from this requirement include the HVAC air handler fan. If you're using a true supply-side ventilation fan, there is no sound requirement. From an efficiency perspective, it continues to say that if you're going to use a furnace fan to bring in fresh air from the outside, it needs to be an ECM or ICM motored furnace. So you have to upgrade your furnace slightly to do that. And then air inlets continue to be looked at by the program. Section 3 is talking about room by room heat load and cooling load. This is what the rater will actually verify in the house. We're looking for if there's a match. We're looking at basically, does it match the as-built house with options? So in essence, if you are building house A and house A has a variety of different options, and we get out there and option B is chosen, does the plan actually, the HVAC design report, reflect option B in that plan A? We need to create option-specific designs or group, include an orientation loads on this report. You'll see down in section 3.10, The orientations are listed out there, and the loads need to be listed out there. Or you can do site-specific design work and get around that. Section 4 is talking about heating and cooling equipment selection. All equipment selected per ACA Manual S. This part of the checklist has been reformatted, but the requirements are basically the same as revision 7. They are looking for a cooling sizing percentage that's within the cooling sizing limits that are shown below here. And footnote 21 says that the evaporator and the condenser unit shall be properly matched as demonstrated by the AHRI reference numbers. So although the raters are no longer collecting the AHRI reports, you still need to select the equipment based off the AHRI process. The cooling sizing limits are based off of the speed of the system. So if you're using a single speed, a 2-speed, or a variable speed system, your recommended sizing limits are there, and then what's allowed. So you're allowed to be outside the recommendations, but you're going to get your best performance if you can keep your sizing within the recommended limits there. On the heating side, again, the checklist has been reformatted a little bit, but again, it's quite similar to revision 7. Again, the heating sizing percentage is within the heating sizing limits. You'll see here that you're allowed to be, when you're using heating only, between 100% and 140%. So in essence, you can be 40% oversized for that particular house. Duct design, footnotes 26 is the important one here. It says designers may provide supplemental documents with room by room and total design airflows in lieu of completing section 5. So this is basically your RightSoft or your elite design reports. Instead of handwriting all this into the design checklist, you can just provide the actual elite or RightSoft design reports or other reports if you're using a different software. Footnote 27 says that orientation-specific room-by-room design airflows are recommended but not required to distribute airflow proportional to loads, thereby improving comfort and efficiency. So in essence, we really are looking for a room-by-room report and design. So this is that section 5 blown up and more so you can truly see it here. In essence, what we're saying is that if you send in your full manual JD&S software design report, then you don't need to fill out this section. Okay, design total external static pressure is one of the things that needs to be recorded in section 5. So the total external static pressure is talking about the design's total external static pressure, and it's the pressure corresponding to the design HVAC airflow, exclusive of external components like the evaporator coil, the whole house humidifier, or any type of filter that might be in the system. This measurement of the external static pressure continues to be something that the rater will be measuring, and it seems to be a continual problem point out there in the field for HVAC contractors to get the correct measurement. So we just wanted to review this really quickly here. Again, the measurement of the resistance to the flow of air in the duct system that the furnace fan has to work against is what defines the external static pressure. This is talking about everything that's external to the furnace cabinet itself. So on the supply side, we're talking about the AC coil, the supply ducts, the register covers. All of these things are creating resistance to the flow of air from the furnace cabinet. On the return side, we have the filter with the return ductwork and the return air grills. Again, these are creating resistance to the flow of air back to the furnace. So the external static pressure is the sum of the return pressure and the supply pressure created by the blower regardless of the pressure that it's doing. So you just take away the plus and minus sign and add these two up and get your total external static pressure. It's very important where these measurements are taken in order to get a good external static pressure. The external static pressure on the return side are taken at the inlets to the furnace blower after the filter. So as soon as you can get, as close as you can get to the inlets to the furnace blower compartment. On the supply side, they're taken at as the air exits the furnace cabinet before it hits the evaporative cooler. We're seeing some great designs and some great installations out there. For example, the picture in the lower left here is showing a 1-inch transition piece between the furnace and the AC coil, so that you actually have a place where you can take this measurement without having to drill a hole into the furnace cabinet or into the coil. And likewise, I don't like this filter slot very much, but at least it gives you a space between the filter and the blower compartment to actually take the measurement. Sometimes the filter boxes, you might just need to figure out how to drill that filter box so you can get between the filter and the blower to get the accurate measurement there. Again, the sum of the two measurements are added together regardless of the pressure signs to get your total external static pressure. The other thing that needs to happen, and is happening pretty well in a variety of different ways, is that you should be marking these holes where you're taking your measurements. The rater is required. This is the one test that the rater is required to duplicate that you're actually doing as well. So we want to make sure that we're taking that measurement in the same place that you're taking that measurement. We're no longer required to compare our two results. This measurement is a measurement that's being held basically for your quality assurance as your HQITO might come out and look at your work. They're going to be asking raters for this measurement and potentially the other documentation that we're trying to house for you. Okay, the rater design review checklist. So we've talked about the HVAC design review report. Now this is the report that the rater is utilizing to review your HVAC design report. It's broken up into a number of sections. Section 1 is about the partnership status. Is the builder, is the HVAC contractor an ENERGY STAR partner and an ENERGY STAR credentialed contractor? Section 2 and 3 is looking at fenestration and insulation levels that are utilized in the design report, and Section 4 is the actual HVAC design report review. Partnership status, we're verifying that the builder is an ENERGY STAR partner and that the HVAC contractor holds the credentials. Currently, we still have two HVAC credentialing organizations. One is through ACA and their QA program, and the other is through Advanced Energy, which I believe is the QAP program, which is the Quality Assurance Professional. Again, the rater is ensuring that we have a sound thermal building envelope and that the HVAC contractor is using the actual R values and U values that are needed in that particular house. At a minimum, they should be at the 2009 IEC insulation requirements, but largely we see here on the Front Range of Colorado that we're using insulations that exceed the 2009. So you should be using the actual R values and U values and solar heat gain coefficients that are for that particular house. The HVAC contractor is required to utilize the exact house specifications. The design review checklist, this is what the rater is required to review. It must match the specific house with within these new tolerances. If the system design is the system designed to meet these loads? That's the ultimate question that we're trying to answer. So the tolerances, again, are plus or minus 2 occupants within 0 to 300 square feet of conditioned floor area, between 0 and 60 square feet windows, within 0.1 solar heat gain coefficient. the sensible latent loads matched per orientation of the house are within less than or equal to 6 kVTUs there. So these are the things that we're looking at. Again, we just want to hit home the notion that these things need to match your design report and the actual house that's getting verified out there. And then the cooling and heating sizing limits are the last thing. The Rater design checklist, again, is we're looking at the installed equipment is verified per design, whether you're using the single design method or site-specific method or the grouping design method. We need to provide new design reports if the equipment is installed at final is different than the design, or if the equipment is changed at the time of the install and it doesn't match the reports, then we're going to need to get a new set of reports. The HVAC design report should be turned in at the design stage, but at a minimum it must be returned into us before the final inspections happen. Those final inspections, as everybody knows, are usually fairly close to final, so as soon as we can get those HVAC design reports, the better off everybody's going to be. Okay, the Rater field checklist. The Rater field checklist is the thermal enclosure systems checklist. It's all the same items that have been cleaned up a bit. We're again looking at insulation and windows and air barrier issues, reduced thermal bridging issues, which would be like insulated headers and 3-stud corners, air sealing issues. They're broken up into sections. Section 1 is the fenestration and installation sections. Fully lined air barriers, Section 2. Reduced thermal bridging, Section 3. And the air sealing components are in Section 4 of this checklist. Again, the whole idea of the thermal enclosure checklist is to ensure that we have a sound thermal envelope so that the HVAC contractor can rely on the thermal envelope and right-size the equipment to the exact configuration and specifications of that particular house you're working with. The field checklist has an HVAC section. We're looking at heating and cooling equipment in Section 5, duct quality installation in Section 6, pull-outs ventilation systems in Section 7, local mechanical exhaust, that's spot ventilation in bathrooms and kitchens and laundries in Section 9, filtration in Section 9, and then combustion appliances in Section 10. Let's look at this in a little bit more depth. Duct quality installation, again, is looking at kinks, bends, compression, especially in the flex duct systems, that the flex duct is pulled tight and not kinked as it's bending around framing or other members in the house. We're looking at duct boots being sealed to the subfloor and to the drywall. Bedroom pressure balancing is taking place, and duct insulation is in place when needed. We're also doing the total duct leakage testing and duct leakage outside testing as required by the program. With regards to duct sealing and testing, we want to make sure that the ducts are sealed properly. Remember that duct boots need to be sealed to the subfloor and to the drywall, and it's real important that we work with the builders to make sure that these requirements are in the proper scope of work, especially the duct sealing to the drywall. If you are not the contractor that's doing that, we need to make sure that the painter or the drywaller or whoever's going to be sealing the duct boots to the drywaller, that it's actually in their scope of work and everybody understands that it needs to be done, and that it will be verified there. With regards to duct testing, we will be testing these systems. If you if you don't have complete confidence in the way that we block off our systems using duct plugs and our taping methodology, we're more than willing to utilize your sealing. The picture in the upper left-hand corner is what some contractors are doing when they're sealing the duct boot to the subfloor. They're also sealing a piece of tin over that, which gives us a very airtight assembly to do the test with. So if you'd like to do that and continue to do that, we're more than happy to take your blocking. We have done a number of tests on our foam plugs with what's called a pressure pan to ensure that the foam plug is working and working well. But as you know, sometimes things happen and they don't seal up quite as well as we would like. So we want to make sure that everybody has confidence in the tests that are happening there. And if you want to take more control over that, then you should do the sealing that's demonstrated in the picture in the upper left-hand corner. Whole house mechanical ventilation needs to be incorporated into the HVAC design. We verify the ventilation rate per ASHRAE 62.2, so we're actually measuring the ventilation rate and comparing it to the design. You can see in section 7.1 underlined in red there that there's a new allowance for that ventilation verification. It could be plus or minus 15 CFM or plus or minus 15% of the design value. This will give us a little bit more leeway for those houses that aren't exactly meeting the ASHRAE 62.2 design rate. We're also looking for ventilation controls, the zone rating or ECM motors that are accompanying the equipment, and the ventilation strategy. And we're looking for ventilation air intake locations to ensure that we're getting the freshest air possible. So we have local spot mechanical ventilation, needs to be ducted to the outside. Kitchen fans must be capable of exhausting at least 100 CFM, and if the rated airflow is unknown, we need to ensure that at least a 6-inch smooth duct is run to the outside. What EnergyLogic has been doing is trying to ensure that a 6-inch smooth duct is always installed at the kitchen hood to the outside. In that case, we do not need to try and verify the fan flow. We can use this in lieu of actually testing the fan flow to make sure that we're getting enough ventilation of the kitchen. For spot ventilation in bathrooms, the bath fans need to move at least 50 CFM if they're going to be an intermittent fan. And now the zone rating is recommended. The less than or equal to 3 zones is a recommendation that we think should stay with the program, but it's not required. If you're using that fan for whole house controlled mechanical ventilation, like the Panasonic Whisper Green fan, that fan does need to be less than or equal to 1 zone. But for normal bath ventilation or laundry ventilation, you are no longer required to have a 3-zone or less fan. For filtration, you need to remember in section 9 that the MERV 6 filter continues to be required. You need to take in that additional static pressure that the MERV 6 filter will generate on the system into your design. We also need to make sure that there's a gasketed filter door over that system so that air isn't being drawn from outside the system through the filter, and that all the filter is capturing all the air and there's no bypass around the filter. Next section is section 10, talking about combustion appliances. In this case, we're still requiring sealed combustion or direct vented appliances. There is an exception. If you were to use an atmospherically vented appliance, you could do a combustion safety test, but that combustion safety test is quite detailed and increases a lot of headaches for the program, so we are going to continue to request that only sealed combustion or direct vented appliances be installed in these homes. The HVAC commissioning checklist is the next checklist that Revision 8 is highlighting here. This checklist is divided into sections like the other ones. Section 1 is talking about commissioning overview. Section 2 is talking about refrigerant charge. And Section 3 is about indoor HVAC fan airflow. And Section 4 is about air balancing the system. This checklist does not have to be turned into the rater anymore, but the rater, the builder, or the HVAC oversight organization can request it at any time. So in essence, EnergyLogic will be requesting this, and we would like it to be continued to be turned in. So EnergyLogic would like to encourage everyone to turn them in so that we can act as a centralized storage and record-keeping body for the program. If you do not turn it in, however, it's your responsibility to keep and store these checklists in case it's ever requested from us as the rater, from the builder, or the HVAC Quality Assurance Oversight Organization. This is your responsibility, and we will not monitor that it's been turned in or not, and we will not hold up certification for the house if we don't receive it anymore. But again, we would like to encourage you to turn it in to us, again, so that we can act as a centralized storage and record-keeping facility for you and for your oversight organization. The HVAC commissioning checklist is looking at the same items that were on revision 7 of the checklist. Things have been reorganized a little bit. Again, they're looking at that the HVAC contractor must validate the HVAC design reports is specific to the model that is being tested. So again, it goes back to that either a site-specific or a grouping design for that particular house. Refrigerant charge, it's talking about running the system for at least 15 minutes before doing the test. If the outdoor ambient temperature at the condenser is less than 55 degrees, then a system shall include the TXV valve to be able to charge that system properly. Commissioning checklist says in section 3 is about indoor HVAC airflow. So it's utilizing a measurement of the external static pressure. Remember to mark those holes for the raters, and then measure HVAC airflow using the static pressure and the fan speed. You can create and figure out what the fan flow is, and the HVAC fan flow needs to be plus or minus 15% of the design HVAC airflow in order to meet the requirements of the program. I guess just real quick, you can use this methodology, but if there are HVAC companies that are using the true flow plate or other methods to measure the fan flow, you're allowed to continue to do that as well. Air balancing of supply registers and return grills are recommended now. They're not required. It's not a requirement of the program, so you don't have to turn in a balancing report. Footnote 4 says that air balancing is highly recommended to improve the performance of the HVAC system and comfort of the occupants. When air balancing is complete, the balancing dampers or proper duct sizing shall be used instead of loop or coil ductwork to limit flow to the diffusers. When balancing dampers are used, they shall be located at the trunk to limit noise unless the trunk will not be accessible, which is most of the time. So we're seeing mainly boot dampers being used. In such cases, you can also use opposable blade dampers, or dampers located at the duct boot are permitted to be used. But we wanted to make sure that you remember, if you're using the opposable blade dampers, which are basically the louvers of your over your at your register, sorry, you want to make sure that you balance those systems after we've been in the house, because anytime we go in and do the pressure balancing of the rooms, we will go in and kick all the opposable blade diffuser dampers open completely in order to get the proper room balance pressures there. So it's generally not recommended to use opposable blade dampers for balancing because they never stay in one place over time. Okay, so those are the bulk of the HVAC checklists that are out there. The last checklist or requirement that we're going to talk about is the builder's water management systems. Used to be called a checklist. Now you can see that it's not created as a checklist anymore. They're not things that you check off, but all of these things are required by the builder to incorporate into their process. It's broken into the water management foundation and site management, into water managed wall assemblies, water managed roof assemblies, and water managed building materials. The same exemptions for Climate Zone 5B are still in place in this water management system that were in Revision 7. So it shouldn't be a big change for any of the builders out there. What is changed is that this required compliance. It's not required to turn anything into the rater, but you are required to comply with the items on this checklist if you're building these houses and certifying them as ENERGY STAR. So it's essential that the current checklist, essentially the current checklist, but without any of the check boxes, as I said before, and EnergyLogic will offer any consultation that's needed on how to implement the checklist within your construction practices. So if you're having difficulty ensuring that all of these features are being installed in your house and that you're getting the correct water management that you need, don't hesitate to give us a call. We can also work with you through our third-party water management offerings if that's something that makes sense for you. So the revisions of this checklist are available on our website or on the EnergyStar.gov website. So you can go to either of these locations. Remember, the handouts that you can download right now have all the checklists on there, and we will send out all of this documentation with the recording of this webinar as well to all the attendees of this webinar. I wanted to make sure that you're aware of some of the upcoming resources that that will be coming that you can use to help you succeed in implementing this program. There will be a number of short informative videos that ENERGY STAR is working on and will be available on their website. Some of these are available now and more will be coming. ENERGY STAR is also creating better builder and sales training for builders and sales agents out there, so you should check the website for that. ENERGY STAR trainings for builder field superintendents is something that should be coming shortly, and for new sales training is actually posted already on the ENERGY STAR website. So in conclusion, we want to make sure that you understand that it's our job to help builders and other trade partners ensure that there's a defined and sound building envelope. We utilize the thermal enclosure checklist to do that so that the HVAC report can reflect the actual energy features in the house and get a right-sized piece of equipment into that house to heat and cool the house. The HVAC design report is designed to specifications of the as-built house. The Rater Design Review Checklist is used to review the HVAC design report to the actual house that's being certified. The HVAC Commissioning Checklist is roughly the same as the Revision 7 checklist. Again, there's not a requirement to turn it in, but we'd recommend that you do. And then the HVAC water management requirements are now requirements, not a checklist-based system for the builder part of the program. Transition timelines. Partners are permitted to use the revisions immediately, so whenever you're ready to begin using them, you can use them. Any home permitted after July 1st, 2016 must utilize the Revision 8 checklist for the program. We believe that this is a longer transition period has been provided given the significant changes that we see in the structure of the Revision 8 checklist. However, EnergyLogic feels that the transition timeline is probably too long and that it's going to actually cause some issues with regards to houses that are partially using Revision 7 and partially using Revision 8. So we're going to try to do a couple things. The first thing that we're going to do is that the HVAC contractor will basically be making the decision if they're using Revision 7 or Revision 8 documents. But if they choose to use Revision 7, then they have to continue that throughout all. You can't use some revision 7 and some revision 8 documents. You need to be consistent with the program that you're using. We also want to basically draw a line in the sand and say that everybody needs to be fully transitioned by January 1st, 2016. This should give us more than enough time to go through grouping exercises and ensure that everybody's had the time to transition to revision 8. It gives us a consistent timeline so that everybody's aware that on January 1st, EnergyLogic's going to start reviewing houses only on revision 8, and it will make sure that everybody's getting the true benefits of the revision 8 transition and true benefits of the changes in revision 8 so that we can move forward successfully into 2016. There might be some site-specific houses that this might not work with, but we really want to hold true to transitioning everybody by January 1st. So that gives us almost 6 months to be able to do that. Questions? We have some time to answer some questions. Type in your questions and Diana will review them, and Rusty and I are available to answer some questions.
Okay, I did get a question. What about the states that have adopted the 2012 Energy Code but does not enforce the code due to being a home rule state, which allows individual jurisdictions to do as they please?
I can take a guess at that question. You might have to go to Energy Star to get to verify it, but whenever I hear the term home rule, it's basically meaning that each jurisdiction has the ability to adopt whatever code they want, and therefore version 3.1 requirements would not be required in that state, and you could stay on revision 3.